You've heard the hits 1,000 times. You know every word of Hey Jude, every riff of Come Together. But somewhere between the concerts and the chart toppers, the Beatles quietly made some of the strangest, most fascinating music of their careers, and most people never noticed. Today, we're going through The Beatles, 15 weird songs you didn't know. Number 15, Flying by the Beatles. There's a good chance you've never heard this one, and there's a reason. Flying is the only instrumental the Beatles ever officially released on a record label. That alone sets it apart. But what really makes it unusual is the writing credit. Almost every Beatles song was credited either to Lennon-McCartney or to Harrison alone. Flying was different. It was the first, and essentially the only song to carry all four names: Harrison, Lennon, McCartney, and Starkey. It started as a jam. Paul McCartney needed something for a traveling scene in the magical Mystery Tour film and suggested the group make something up on the spot. He described it afterward as a simple 12-bar blues, just a nice backing with a melody on top. John Lennon played the main theme on a mellotron set to a trombone sound, while all four Beatles sang the melody in wordless syllables, their voices blending into something that sounds genuinely otherworldly. Originally called Aerial Tour Instrumental, it accompanied color-altered footage of Iceland landscape shot from an airplane in the film. Footage recycled from unused outtakes of Stanley Kubrick's 1964 film Dr. Strangelove. Lennon and Ringo Starr later extended the track with tape loops to over 9.5 minutes. That version was trimmed to just over 2 minutes for release. As McCartney later put it, the only thing that technically made it a song was the melody he'd written. Otherwise, it was a blues jam that happened to end up on one of the most famous records in pop history. Number 14, Blue Jay Way by George Harrison. In August 1967, George Harrison arrived in Los Angeles with his wife Pattie Boyd. He'd rented a house high in the Hollywood Hills on a street called Blue Jay Way. The plan was to meet up with Derek Taylor, the Beatles' former press officer. Taylor got delayed, and Harrison, jet-lagged after the transatlantic flight, found himself alone in a fog-covered house, trying not to fall asleep before his friend arrived. To stay awake, Harrison sat at a small Hammond organ he'd noticed in the corner and began to write. That song became Blue Jay Way. What makes the recording so deliberately strange is its disorientation. Harrison built it around a droning organ that barely moves, and the engineers applied ADT, artificial double tracking, to his voice, creating a doubled, slightly out-of-phase effect. In the stereo mix, the backing vocals were played backwards, appearing to answer Harrison's lead vocal as if responding to each line. Flanging, a Leslie rotary speaker effect, and reversed tape sounds were all layered in, giving the whole thing a swirling, unsettled quality. Beatles historian Mark Lewison compared the recording to Strawberry Fields Forever and I Am the Walrus in how completely it captured the studio experimentation of 1966 and 1967. The rhythm track, including the distinctive swirling organ, was recorded in a single take on September 6, 1967. Overdubs, including tambourine and a cello part played by session musician Peter Willison, were added across 2 further sessions in September and October. In the magical Mystery Tour film, Harrison is shown sitting cross-legged in a red suit, busking on a roadside through thick artificial smog. The filmmakers attempt to recreate the fog he'd described in the song. The segment also uses prismatic photography that refracts his image repeatedly, as if seen through a compound eye. Number 13, Only a Northern Song by George Harrison. By 1967, George Harrison had a problem that didn't get much public discussion. His songs did not earn him the same share of publishing income as Lennon and McCartney. Northern Songs, the Beatles' publishing company, had been floated on the London Stock Exchange in February 1965. Lennon and McCartney each owned 15% of it. Harrison and Ringo Starr each owned 0.8%, meaning Lennon and McCartney profited more from Harrison's compositions than Harrison did from his own work. "Only a Northern Song," was Harrison's response, a recording whose title references the very company whose structure he was quietly protesting. The music matches the intent. Harrison built the recording to be deliberately, stubbornly off-kilter. He and the band added off-pitch trumpet and organ parts without much concern for making it sound appealing. It was recorded during the Sgt. Pepper sessions in early 1967, but judged too uncommercial for the album. It stayed shelved until 1969, when it appeared on the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, a project the band treated as secondary and made little effort to promote. Harrison later said the song's target was primarily Dick James, the managing director of Northern Songs, who had signed Harrison at 20, without making clear that doing so meant signing away ownership of his compositions. Number 12, Wild Honey Pie by Paul McCartney. Wild Honey Pie is 52 seconds long, features only Paul McCartney, and ended up on the White Album largely because Pattie Boyd, George Harrison's wife, said she liked it. McCartney wrote the piece during the Beatles' 1968 retreat to Rishikesh, India, where the group traveled to study transcendental meditation. It started as an informal sing-along. Back in London that August, McCartney recorded it at the end of a session that had just produced Mother Nature's Son. He played every instrument himself, guitar, drums, and vocals, and completed the recording in a single evening. The piece has no real structure. It's a looped riff that builds and falls apart over less than a minute. George Martin, the Beatles' producer, had argued that the White Album should be cut to a single disc of the strongest material. Wild Honey Pie would almost certainly not have made his shortlist. What the recording reflects instead is the particular freedom of the White Album sessions, where the four members largely worked independently, recorded whatever they felt like, and submitted the results without much collective scrutiny. Number 11. What's the New Mary Jane by John Lennon.
What a shame, Mary Jane, what a shame, Mary Jane had a pain at the party.
This is one of the strangest recordings the Beatles ever made, and for nearly 30 years, almost nobody heard it. Lennon composed the song during the Rishikesh trip in early 1968. The studio version was recorded on August 14, 1968, during White Album sessions. Lennon played piano and sang. George Harrison played guitar. Yoko Ono and road manager Mal Evans contributed vocals and percussion. McCartney and Ringo Starr were not involved. 4 takes were recorded, with the final version running over 6 minutes and including tape loops, sound effects, and extended passages of near incoherence. Lennon later described it as me, Yoko, and George sitting on the floor at EMI fooling around.
What a shame, Mary Jane had a pain at the party.
Considered for the White Album, the song was dropped during the final sequencing session. Lennon tried to revive it in November 1969, hoping to release it as a Plastic Ono Band single. Apple Records issued a catalog number and announced a December 1969 release date. That release was quietly canceled after the other Beatles objected to a Beatles recording appearing under Lennon's separate band's name. The song finally received an official release in October 1996 on Anthology 3, almost 30 years after it was recorded. In a 1974 radio interview, Lennon himself expressed surprise when a caller said they'd heard it, noting he didn't even have a copy and couldn't play it on air.
What a shame, Mary Jane, what a shame, Mary Jane had a pain at the party.
Number 10. You Know My Name, Look Up the Number by the Beatles. Paul McCartney later called this his favorite Beatles track, not because it was their most accomplished, but precisely because it was so completely absurd. John Lennon described it as probably the funniest thing they ever did. The recording started in May and June 1967, during downtime around the Sgt. Pepper sessions. Lennon wrote the title from a slogan he'd noticed, and the group spent 3 sessions turning it into a piece of extended musical comedy. In its original form, it ran over 6 minutes, moving through multiple sections. A blues passage, a lounge singer segment where Lennon adopts a ridiculous Vegas-style persona, and a finale featuring saxophone played by Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, who came in during a June 1967 session. After the basic track was done, the song sat in the vaults for nearly 2 years. On April 30th, 1969, Lennon and McCartney returned to add all the vocal tracks in a single session. Harrison and Starr did not participate that day. Lennon attempted to release it as a Plastic Ono Band single in late 1969. Apple even assigned it a catalog number. When that plan collapsed, the song was released in March 1970 as the B-side of the Let It Be single. The original Plastic Ono Band catalog number is still visible, scratched out, but there, in the run-out groove of original British pressings of that record. Number 9. Piggies by George Harrison. George Harrison started writing Piggies in 1966, around the same time he was composing Taxman for Revolver. He set it aside and didn't return to it until 1968, when he found the manuscript in the attic of his parents' house in Liverpool. He brought it to the White Album sessions and completed it with contributions from an unlikely pair. His mother, Louise Harrison, supplied a key line about the Piggies needing a damn good whacking, chosen for its rhyme and its bluntly English tone. John Lennon contributed the image of the Piggies clutching forks and knives, adding satirical sharpness to Harrison's original draft. The recording features a harpsichord, not a typical Beatles instrument, played by producer Chris Thomas, who had been brought in to assist George Martin during the exhausting sessions. Thomas had wandered into an adjacent studio, found the instrument set up for a classical session, and rather than move it, the Beatles relocated their session to record around it. The track also includes a string ensemble and pig sound effects edited in at the end. Harrison described the song as a lighthearted satire on consumerism and class distinction, inspired by George Orwell's Animal Farm. During the same session, Thomas first heard Harrison quietly playing a new, unfinished song on the harpsichord. That song turned out to be Something. Thomas urged Harrison to pursue it, and Something eventually became the first Harrison composition to appear on a Beatles A-side. Piggies, meanwhile, was later, and disastrously, misread by Charles Manson, who incorporated its imagery into his delusional reading of the White Album as a racial prophecy. The song has carried that association ever since, despite Harrison's clear intent, which had nothing to do with anything Manson imagined. Number 8. Not Guilty by George Harrison. Not guilty. In August of 1968, the Beatles spent 4 sessions across 4 days recording a George Harrison song. They recorded over 100 takes. Then they left it off the album. Harrison wrote Not Guilty after the Beatles' trip to Rishikesh, where he had led the group to study transcendental meditation under Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. The trip ended in acrimony, and Harrison felt he was being blamed by Lennon and McCartney for having drawn them into the whole experience. The song was his defense, a statement that he was not responsible for what had happened and was not going to accept the blame being quietly assigned to him. The recording proved extremely difficult. The song's time signature changes were hard to master. The band spent the first 18 takes of the first session working only on the 4-bar introduction. They recorded over 100 takes across multiple nights, with Lennon switching from electric piano to harpsichord for take 99, which was eventually judged best. Harrison recorded his lead vocal in the studio control room, with the backing track blasting through monitor speakers to give him the feel of a live performance. Even with all that effort, the song was cut from the White Album's running order. It stayed hidden for years, circulating as a much-discussed bootleg, until it appeared in an edited form on Anthology 3 in 1996. The complete, unedited version wasn't officially available until the 50th anniversary box set of the White Album in 2018. Harrison later re-recorded the song for his 1979 solo album with a soft jazz pop arrangement that sounded nothing like the raw, electric 1968 original. Number 7. Mr. Moonlight by the Beatles. Mr. Moonlight. Mr. Moonlight was written by Roy Lee Johnson and first recorded in 1962 as an obscure R&B single. It made its way to England and into the record collections of 4 young men in Liverpool who had a particular instinct for finding strange, overlooked material from the edges of the American charts. Mr. Moonlight, come again, please. The Beatles played it live for years before recording it. It ended up on Beatles for Sale, released in December 1964, and the recording has divided listeners ever since. John Lennon opens with a vocal that many people describe as a scream, pitched somewhere between urgency and raw chaos. Then the arrangement shifts. McCartney plays a Hammond organ in the middle section that has always felt slightly out of place in ways that are difficult to explain. Harrison plays an African drum. The elements don't seem to belong together, and their combination creates something genuinely odd. Lennon said little in defense of the song in later years, but what the recording captures is the Beatles doing something they were particularly known for in their early period, digging into the stranger corners of the American R&B catalog, the B-sides and deep cuts that other British bands never bothered with, and playing them with complete, unironic commitment, even when the result was as difficult to categorize as this one.
Mr. Moonlight.
Number 6. Dig It by the Beatles.
For Christ's sake, come on!
On January 26, 1969, the Beatles were at Apple Studios on Savile Row. John Lennon picked up a 6-string bass, sat at the microphone, and began improvising over a simple chord progression, free associating a stream of names and words without any fixed structure or plan. The improvisation ran to around 14 minutes across several attempts. The Beatles came back and played it again on January 28th and 29th. What ended up on the finished album was 49 seconds, chosen from one of the longer performances. The song was credited to all 4 Beatles, one of only a handful of recordings to carry all 4 names. At the end of the final performance on January 26th, Lennon spoke the words, "That was Can You Dig It?" by Georgie Wood. And now, we'd like to do Hark the Angels Come. Those words were used on the finished album as a transition between Dig It and Let It Be. The longer improvised versions circulated among collectors for years. Some of them include Lennon singing the names of other songs being recorded during the same sessions. Don't Let Me Down, Get Back, Two of Us turned into an accidental inventory of the Let It Be recordings in progress.
For Christ's sake, come on!
Number 5. Maggie May by the Beatles. Between takes of Two of Us on January 24th, 1969, the 4 Beatles started playing a song that none of them had written. Maggie May, usually spelled May in traditional versions, is a Liverpool folk song dating to the early 19th century. It tells the story of a sailor returning home to Liverpool who is robbed by a woman named Maggie on Lime Street. The Beatles had grown up hearing it and played it in their earliest years as a working band. It had been part of the Liverpool street tradition for generations, sung by sailors, performed in pubs, known by most people in the city the way certain songs just become part of the local air. What they recorded that January was not a rehearsed arrangement. It was 39 seconds of 4 men playing something they'd always known, stopping only when the momentum ran out. The recording was credited to all 4 Beatles as arrangers of the traditional song, which allowed them to collect the publishing income for a piece that was otherwise in the public domain. It was also the first cover song to appear on a Beatles album since Act Naturally, recorded in June 1965. For help, at 39 seconds, Maggie May remains the second shortest song in the official Beatles catalog, behind only Her Majesty, which runs a full 23 seconds. Number 4, Her Majesty by Paul McCartney.
Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but she doesn't have a lot to say.
Her Majesty is 23 seconds long. It has no verse, no chorus, no bridge, and it ends before most listeners know it started. McCartney wrote it during the Abbey Road sessions as a short, lighthearted piece about Queen Elizabeth II. The original plan was to include it between Mean Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam in the famous Side 2 medley. After an early edit, McCartney decided he didn't want it there and told the engineers to remove it.
Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but you change it from day to day.
The standard practice at Abbey Road was to discard nothing. Material cut from a master tape was attached to the end of the reel, separated by a stretch of silence, to be disposed of later. That's what happened with Her Majesty. It was spliced to the tail end of the tape and never actually thrown away. When the album was assembled, it stayed. Listeners who played the record all the way through the grand orchestral conclusion of The End would hear, after a long silence, 23 seconds of McCartney alone with an acoustic guitar. The abrupt ending, with its unresolved chord, happened because the opening chord of Polythene Pam was still attached to the cut, audible as the song stops. McCartney eventually decided he liked the result. Her Majesty became one of the earliest hidden tracks in rock history, placed there not by design but by the Abbey Road rule of never throwing tape away.
Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but she doesn't have a lot to say.
Number 3. Good Night by John Lennon, sung by Ringo Starr. John Lennon wrote Good Night for his son Julian. It's a lullaby, straightforward, unironic, genuinely tender. And when it came time to record it, Lennon had someone else sing it. Ringo Starr performed the lead vocal while Lennon stood by. George Martin built a full orchestral and choral arrangement around it, in a grand, old-fashioned Hollywood style that sounds entirely unlike anything else the Beatles were recording in 1968. The song closes the White Album, the second disc of a record that also contains Revolution 9 and Happiness is a Warm Gun, and its placement creates one of the more unexpected moments in the band's entire catalog. Lennon never recorded Good Night in his own voice on any official release. He wrote the most purely sentimental lyric on the album and handed it to the drummer, wrapped in a full orchestra. The contrast is hard to ignore. A bedtime song written for a child by one of rock music's most guarded and ironic personalities, delivered with complete sincerity, tucked at the end of one of the most sprawling and contradictory albums ever made. Number 2. Carnival of Light by the Beatles. There is a Beatles recording that almost nobody has ever heard. It runs approximately 14 minutes. It has never been officially released, and it exists in the vaults at Abbey Road. In January 1967, the Beatles were invited to contribute a piece to the million-volt Light and Sound rave, an avant-garde happening at the Roundhouse in London. They recorded it on January 5th, 1967, a 14-minute collage of distorted guitar, organ drones, random studio noise, Lennon and McCartney calling out words into microphones, and tape loops layered over one another in extended improvisation. The piece was played at the event and then shelved. McCartney has periodically campaigned for its official release, describing it as proof of how far the Beatles were willing to push into experimental territory. George Harrison vetoed a proposed release on Anthology 2 in 1995. No official version has appeared since. The recording has no melody, no conventional rhythm section, and no recognizable song structure. What makes it worth noting, beyond the mystery, is the context. It was made on the same day the Beatles finished overdubs for Penny Lane. 2 recordings completed in a single working day that could scarcely be more different from each other. Number 1. In Spite of All the Danger by the Quarrymen. Before there were Beatles, there were the Quarrymen. In the summer of 1958, before Ringo Starr, before George Martin, before EMY, the teenage group that would become the most famous band in the world walked into a home recording setup in Liverpool and paid to cut a record. One of the 2 songs they recorded that day was In Spite of All the Danger, written by Paul McCartney. John Lennon and George Harrison played on it. The acetate disc they pressed was passed between the group's members, each keeping it for a period before handing it to the next. Eventually, it ended up with John Lowe, the pianist on the session, and stayed with him for over 2 decades.
I'll do anything for you, anything.
In the 1980s, McCartney purchased the disc from Lowe and had it carefully transferred and preserved. The recording, scratchy, fragile, made in someone's living room by teenagers, was included in the 1995 Anthology 1 release. Technically, it is not a Beatles recording. The band had no name when they made it, but it is the oldest surviving recording of Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison making music together, captured more than 4 years before the world knew any of their names. Hearing it now, knowing what came after, there's something in the thinness of the sound, the closeness of the voices, the intimacy of the room that takes you all the way back to the beginning of the story. The Beatles recorded over 250 songs in 8 years, and the ones that reached the charts were only part of the picture. there was always something else happening. Stranger, older, more personal, or just more peculiar than anything that ended up on the radio. From a 16-year-old Paul McCartney recording in a living room, to John Lennon free associating in an Apple Studios basement, to George Harrison quietly protesting his publishing deal in a pop song, these 15 tracks are a reminder of just how wide that picture really was. If you enjoyed this one, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more where this came from.